Oh, yeah.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Well, you have an amazing career. You have a long-time collaboration with David Cronenberg. You've done all of the most iconic films with him.
Virtually all, yeah.
Eastern Promises, A History of Violence, Crash, Existence,
Yeah.
The Fly.
Yeah, The Fly was fun. It really was. Relatively low budget, made quite a lot of money. You know, I cut the lines, be afraid, be very afraid, which has become a meme.
Well, you've also cut other films that weren't with David Cronenberg, like Coraline, The Bang Bang Club, Johnny Mnemonic.
Yeah, they were all fun for their own reasons.
They're so different.
Yeah.
What was it like cutting Coraline compared to like Eastern Promises?
Oh, well, Coraline was animated,
Yeah.
stop motion. Henry Selick was the director, who's brilliant, scares people. He's burned a lot of bridges. That's why he hasn't done anything recently, I think. But he's brilliant. I really liked him.
Mm-hmm.
He was a guitar player, which helped. He had like a 64 Telecaster in his office. They'd been shooting for quite a while when I was hired. And I'm not an animation editor.
Mm-hmm.
There were several already on the movie. I think there were about 6 people in the cutting room, 6 or 7 before I got there. And there was this purge, and somebody thought things weren't going properly. I was never too sure. And I was hired as the live action person from outside just to look at it, as it was being shot and what had already been shot. And they'd done the dialogue, a year and a half before, and then stop motion too. There were sometimes 40 units of a bigger or smaller size shooting at the same time every day. And we screened the week's rushes on Friday night. Mm-hmm. And that was in 3D. Wow. It was so they had to expose every frame twice after moving millions of little things and putting different expressions on the characters' faces, which they did with 3D printing very early in its 3D printers were the size of refrigerators. Mm-hmm. They'd shoot almost nothing. And inevitably in animation, I found that as it goes through every process, the shot gets longer. It's only supposed to be from here to here, X number of frames, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody, in every stage, it gets longer. The handles get added, and then they just cut it in. Of course, one of the things I did was just go back and recut everything, cut off all the heads and tails, and make it actually play. Or look at the storyboards and say, well, why don't you do this? And then you wouldn't have to do this shot. Or why don't you do this in one shot? You wouldn't have to do the 3 shots, that kind of thing. So it was sort of like an editing director. And after a while, Henry started to trust me. I don't think it was his idea that I be there. I had just done a picture for Focus, mm-hmm. which in fact was Eastern Promises, I think. And it might have been Focus that wanted me there. I have a suspicion it was. But Henry learned to trust me, and he saw that I was just trying to make the film better with him. And so it was fun. I'd go down to Portland for a couple of weeks, mm-hmm. and then I'd come back here for a couple of weeks, and then I'd go down to Portland again, and back and forth for 6-7 months. They had the 1-year shooting party soon after I started the movie. It took stop motion. Everything has to be moved. There's a scene in the movie where Coraline's down and the kid that's in the movie rides down the hill on his bicycle, and there's a big hill of grass. Mm-hmm. And wind goes through and it ripples the grass. And there's this wave goes through the grass. Every blade of grass had to be moved before they did the frame, then the next frame, and they had to do every frame twice because it was 3D. It was horrendous. I can't imagine making a movie like that. When they took the cast picture, the photographer had to stand on the roof of the studio because I think there were 450 people in the cast in the crew picture.
Wow!
But I really enjoyed it. Had a great time. Mm-hmm. It was nominated for an ACE award, and they paid for me to go to Los Angeles and go to the ACE thing, which was fun.
Coraline is a lot of people's favorite film.
I thought it was brilliant.
It is brilliant. How did you actually get started in the business?
I was living in Winnipeg. I was in university, and that was the days when people were starting to make student films in universities, back before you were born. Anyway, I knew a couple of guys from music, from playing, so I talked my way onto it, and it seemed like a lot of fun. So when these guys, they went to Toronto, so did I. Quit my crappy job, and came to Toronto and couch surfed, for a summer, and worked in a guy's boat, sold my camera, just sort of, did what you do, and then my girlfriend basically said, "Come back, or your ex." And I wasn't getting anywhere, and I was getting lonely, and I was tired of couch surfing and having no place to live. So I went back to Winnipeg. And eventually I got a job in a small film company in Winnipeg that did documentaries for the government, stuff like that. And they said, "Can you do this? Can you do that?" And I said, yep. And I had, I'd spent some time in people's cutting rooms when I was first in Toronto. So the morning they said, "Well, fine, you can have the job." And the first morning I came in, they said, "We have a little neg cutting for you to do." And I had once watched somebody do neg cutting for the first time. He had been, I didn't even know how to operate the splicer. So I told the guy, "Sorry, I don't know how to do this." So he just laughed and showed me, and I did it. And that was the secret that I used many times. If somebody asks you if you can do something, always say yes, lie if you have to, and then be prepared to deal with it. Know who to ask if you don't know how to do something. And that helped me a lot. So anyway, I worked there for a year or two, got married. We had done a government film that had to be screened in Ottawa. So we took it there and then went to Toronto. And I had heard, the people I still kept in touch with there, I'd heard this guy was had a contract to cut public affairs shows for the CBC. So I went there and asked him for a job. And then we went back to Winnipeg. And a while later, he phoned me and offered me a job. Oh. So then came the big decision. Do we leave our cat, our apartment, all our friends, all our family, both sides, and leave and move to Toronto on the strength of a job that was, I think at that time, paying me like $110 a week, which is about what our quite nice apartment in Toronto costs us per month. And I worked on this public affairs show for a season. And we'd get sometimes 8,000 or 10,000 feet of 16 millimeter film, which is a huge amount. We'd get it sort of the middle of the week, and we'd have to cut something that would go on the air Sunday night. So you have to, you'd work 24 hours a day for 3 or 4 days, and you'd mix it Saturday morning, and it would go to Telecine for the local feed at 8 o'clock or something. And then they started a midweek show, which double door. So it was, I was never home, but I made a lot of really good friends, some of whom I still see. But the major thing was I learned to work really quickly, make the right decision the first time because you didn't have time to recut anything. And I was working with a guy named Alan Collins, who would work on that show for a season. Then he'd go to Los Angeles and cut a movie for Roger Corman, famous low-budget producer. So Alan had cut 2 or 3 of those, so he'd been cutting features. He'd tell me about it. So after the season was over, Alan got a movie in Toronto, and he asked me to come on as, well, I helped him cut the picture. I'd go in at night and open up a cutting room, and he'd give me a reel to work on. And then he got me on the movie as the sound editor, and I knew nothing. So I asked a couple of sound editors. I actually got them hired to do Foley and stuff so I could learn how to do it. And there was a very famous mixer called Joe Grimaldi. He was sort of the guy, the sound mixer. And he was mixing the movie. So the first morning we took in the tracks and they put them up and we mixed away all day. He didn't say anything. At the end of the day, he called me aside and sort of said, well, we sort of have a convention that if you have a lot of, for instance, gunshots, you put them all on gunshot tracks, and car doors will go on the car door tracks. And we just put stuff anywhere, which made his job, impossible. But he didn't say anything. He just whispered it to me at the end of the mix. So my assistant and I went back to the cutting room, recut all the reels for the next day, which meant we didn't go home, and so on and so on. And that's what Joe did for me. And then Alan asked me to do another film and another, and I did 2 or 3 as sound editor, and then met Peter O'Brien. He was a producer. And Alan did a film there, and then I was hired as a sound editor on a picture Alan didn't cut, and the editor that was cutting it had to leave. So they asked me to finish cutting the picture.
Oh, wow.
Which I managed to actually do, and then cut the sound, and then Peter said, well, we should try to get you a picture to cut. I said, oh, that'd be great. So, sometime later, he called me and said, well, do you know a guy named David Cronenberg? I said, yeah, he just did a picture called Rabbit. It was really funny. It was hilarious. And he said, well, he's going to do a picture for us, and I would introduce him to you. I'll call you. So he eventually called me and met David. Only knew him, from Rabbit and Shivers. But I knew he was a sort of up-and-coming horror director. Mm-hmm. So we talked, and we discovered we had a common interest in motor racing and motorcycles. And so we talked about motorcycles and motor racing for an hour or so. And he said, well, if you want to cut the picture, that's okay. So that's how I got into the business, basically. Wow. That picture was Fast Company. And then he did The Brood, which I didn't cut because I was still cutting Fast Company. Mm-hmm. So Alan, from before, cut The Brood. And the next picture was Scanners, and he asked me to do it, and so on and so on.
That's incredible.
That's how it works. You hang around, you meet people. So it was luck. I lied a bit. I learned that if you don't know something, ask.
Yeah.
And ask the right person. Mm. And listen to what they say, and then be prepared to deliver if somebody calls your bluff. Fake it till you make it, sort of. Anybody that asks me, I tell, do what you have to do within your own morality,
I remember when I met you in 2008, your fake it till you make it was one of the most incredible pieces of advice you ever told me. I've told so many people that advice, attributed it to you. And I remember how you said it too. You said, if you're in an interview and they ask you, do you know Photoshop or After Effects? Just say yes. If you get the job, stay up all night learning it. I thought that was so powerful because it really taught me that there isn't anything you can't learn.
No, and chances are if you're going looking for a job, unless, it's a higher level job, chances are that'd be most of the stuff you won't have done. Mm-hmm. And I never minded hiring assistants that didn't know a lot or hadn't got a lot of experience. If I was hiring them on a big picture as a first, I'd probably want somebody that knew what they were doing. I worked with a guy named Tad Seaborn a lot as my assistant.
For a very long time, on a lot of films. Yeah,
we had a great time too because Tad was crazy in those days. We had to hire a couple of assistants because we were doing a picture, and it was on an Avid. Actually, it was History of Violence, and it was for the studio New Line. And although we were doing it on an Avid, they insisted on a film preview, which was the last film preview I think anybody did.
What's a film preview?
Film preview is when you actually have to take the work print, make it clean, make sure the splices don't come apart, and run it in a theater and on a projector. Mm-hmm. Usually on a platter, you'd have somebody platter it up. And that's what we had to do on that. And we didn't know why, but we had to print all of the work print, even though we didn't use it. And we had to have 2 assistants in 2 cutting rooms to conform the picture. And that was one of the people we hired Sandy Pereira for. So we met Sandy.
And Sandy is wonderful.
Well, as we found.
Yeah.
She came in and she was a little nervous, but she'd asked about us to see if we were actually safe and worth working for, which was smart of her. So she came in and we asked her what she'd done, and she'd done some stuff. But basically, we just wanted to see if we'd get along, because when you're on a movie, you spend more time with your assistants than you do with your family. And of course, as you know, Sandy is wonderful. She's funny. So we just said, much like David said to me, we just looked at her and I looked at Ted and we said, well, if you want to do the movie, that's fine. She got to work on film. She got to do that one film movie, doing the Conform, which is an enormously good experience. I think people that haven't worked on film that become editors that have never cut on film have missed a lot of, not so much the craft, but sort of mental rigor that you have to have when it's not so easy to change something. And when, if you want to add 6 frames, you have to get your assistant to find the roll and then roll down to it on the other Steenbeck, and the roll is inevitably the wrong way out.
So did you have to mentally visualize what it would look like?
Yeah. I had to, in my mind, while I was waiting for these things to happen. So I'm going to use this shot next. Then I think it should be the one I remember from Rushes from the other side, and so on and so on. So I had it cut in my head, and you change things a little bit, but not much. So when we started with the Avid, it was pretty clunky because storage was so expensive. But eventually, when it became like we know it now, which is practically seamless, I can put a scene together no time. If it's there, if there are no problems. I mean, the famous bathhouse scene in Eastern Promises, which was choreographed, obviously, with the stunt coordinators, and it was very well put together and shot very well. Everything about it was good. But it meant that I looked at it in the morning, went out to Pret a Manger for our lunch, and then I cut the whole scene in the afternoon. And it was finished by the time I went home. And when David came in, months later, and we were recutting it, we changed a bunch of things, essentially put them all back, except for maybe a few frames, and that's how it went out. Because there was no reason that it should take any time to cut, because everybody else had done their job. There were about 4 masters for different parts. And I looked at the masters and I asked Ted, just cut these 4 masters together for a roadmap, and I'll just cut the scene around it. It was really easy. And people say that was such a great scene, and it was so tense. Yeah, it was a really, really good scene, but only a little bit of it was down to me. I just sort of showed up and did my job that day. Did
you allow the footage to flow, and you just followed the scene?
Yep. Yeah, well, that's what I always do. Well, that's what I try to do. These days, rushes screening. So when we get the rushes in, my assistant and I usually sit and look at the rushes in the morning. I'll go back to cutting what I was cutting, try to keep up with the camera. But if you look at a scene of rushes, you try to find the little sparks of performance, the little things that you see, and then find a way to work them all in, following the performance. Performance is everything. People say, well, how do you start a scene? What kind of shots, what size shot do you start a scene on? No idea. It's often a problem, but you can always change it. The most important thing, when people say, I can't start the scene, I don't know where to start the scene, I just cannot make up my mind. Well, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Just pick a shot at random, cut it in, and then follow it.
Yeah.
That way you're started, and the scene starts to have a life, and it'll tell you, what you didn't know, and you can go back and change it. You can overthink it. Many people do. I try not to think of it at all. I just, I look at it. I know what the script is. I know, by the time they shot for a week or two, where the actors tend to give their performance, what take, early take or later take. And then just find something that's doing something for you and follow it. You can always go back and adjust around it. It only takes seconds on an Avid. Yeah. But yes, it is important to make a decision. You can always change your mind. But if you dither, you're screwed. Because you have to work quickly and well. I try to keep up with the camera because they're going to be striking sets and releasing actors. And sometimes director or David or whoever will have a worry about a scene and ask me to see it. So, these days all I have to do is either stream it to them or put it on a laptop and take it to the studio and say, well, it's okay, but this and this, you might want to shoot something. And don't be afraid to ask for a shot if you think, I've asked David for shots. I've asked Norman Jewison for shots. And they shot them. So, if you think you need something, then you probably do. And I've never been particularly afraid of anybody.
I can see that.
I was in awe working with Norman just because of the things he'd done.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a pretty crusty guy. He can be. But he didn't frighten me. I wasn't afraid to tell him what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And he was cool with it.
Yeah.
He's made, how many movies he's made that are world-class, famous movies.
Yeah.
Really good movies. And, we'd be cutting something and we'd get to come to a scene. He'd say something, we'd change it. He said, okay, let's go on.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't dither. He didn't, do 6 versions. He'd look at it. He'd change the things he wanted to change. And then he said, let's go on.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's the kind of director you want to work with, isn't it?
Yeah.
Makes it easy. I mean, David's like that pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
As time went on, he'd shoot less and less. He knew what he wanted.
Which is funny because he used to shoot on film. You were limited by the film, and now with digital,
He could shoot as much as he wanted, but he shoots as much as he wants, which isn't very much.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to come into the cutting room. We'd sit there for a few months and work. The last few movies, he was in the cutting room for maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Then we'd show it to the producer, and then we'd finish it. And I wouldn't see him till the mix. And I would do the mix. I'd supervise the mix, and he'd come in and look at a reel, give us notes, look at the next reel, give us his thoughts, and go away. Which is the way I think a director should mix. Director shouldn't be in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
You can only see something the first time once.
It's hard to have fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Or fresh ears.
You can only react to it the first time once. So save it.
Yeah.
Some directors don't feel that. Some directors want to see cut footage every night.
Mm-hmm.
I think Guillermo del Toro wants to see stuff every night and every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
David doesn't look at cut stuff until he sees the whole movie, unless there's something he's worried about. And Norman was the same. I prefer that.
Mm-hmm.
It's my cut. It's not the rough cut. It's my cut. There is no rough cut. It takes several hundred people and millions of dollars to make a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then at a certain point, they give it to me. And nobody else is involved, which I really enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not for long, but nobody ever gets to work on it, on so much of the movie by themselves as the editor.
That's true.
That's fun. I like that. It's a job. Actually, it's better than working, I often think. I had a job. I've had a couple of jobs. Luckily, not for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and not very often, where I had to turn up and do stuff and got paid and then go home. A job.
Right.
Don't like them.
So this is more like playing. They pay you to play.
Yeah, and you get to do different stuff with different people, and sometimes you don't have to do anything at all. Like now.
Is there something that you would say to somebody starting out?
Yeah, don't do it.
Why don't do it?
It can be nasty. My brother got into the film business sort of by accident, and I said, don't do it. Go back to school, get a job. If you have to do it, you really have to want to do it with no illusions, because they'll all be destroyed really quickly. Mm-hmm. You'll find there's people that are really not very nice, lots of them.
Yeah.
You'll find people that are, and it's often, they're really, people who've done very well that are quite famous and good at their jobs that are nice. But if you really want to do it, hang around, put yourself in the right place, get to know people, let them get to know your face, be around when somebody needs somebody, join the guild, whatever, go to the meetings, go to film school if you really want to, but, who cares? It's not going to get you a job after, if you went to a good film school and made use of it properly by actually making films. Mm-hmm. But if somebody comes in and said, I just graduated from Ryerson or U of T or USC or UCLA or whatever, I'd say, yes, okay, and, it's not going to get you a job.
Right.
Show me something you did while you were there then.
Mm-hmm. And also, you have to connect with them. Like you said before with Tad and Sandy.
Oh yeah, no, I've never worked with anybody very long in the cutting room that I didn't really like working with. And I still like those people. You know, I still see Tad too, and I still see Sandy. And they all, you know, a lot of them. You know, I worked with Susan Shipton, I worked with Maggie, I worked with Tad and Sandy. You know, a lot of them are editors now.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I pretty much kicked Sandy out and said, you know, I'm sharing my credit on this movie with you at the head of the movie. Now go out and get a movie to cut.
Was that Mean Dreams?
Yeah. I mean, she did the work. You know, I worked with Don Stolier, you know, who's maybe the best assistant in town now. I never worked with her before. She's brilliant. I really like her. And I don't know if she just didn't want the responsibility. She was doing too well, doing what she was doing. She was so good at it. So when I was working with her, I said, here's a scene. I just started it. I'm getting nowhere. I don't like it. Cut it. Cut it for me. And she did. She did a really good job.
That's great.
You know, I've worked with people that were good assistants, but I didn't think they'd ever bet, you know, when they ever cut, I'd say, you want to cut a scene? They'd say, no, don't think so.
Oh, wow.
Because basically all my assistants got a chance to cut scenes.
That's very nice.
We'd watch the rushes and say, so which of these scenes do you want to cut? You know, cut in your own time, do it when you can.
So you encourage that apprenticeship.
Yeah. Also, you know, it was usually a scene I didn't want to cut. Because anybody can learn how to use the software.
Yeah.
You know, literally. You know, if they're good enough to be editors and take work away from me, good for them. When we finished, Don Stolier gave me a gift. A roll of film. And a grease pencil.
Oh.
Because there's this thing, you know, you have film all over the floor and you're talking to somebody and you just roll it up like this. And it's just one of those things you do. And I said, I really missed that. So a couple of months later, she gave me, you know, 200 feet of film and a grease pencil. And I keep it here on my desk.
It's like an old school fidget spinner.
Yep, that's exactly what it was. Synchronizer Racing, you wouldn't have heard of that. You wouldn't even know what a synchronizer was. It's a wheeled thing that you put on a bench in a cutting room. It's got any number of sprocketed wheels, and you put film and track in it, and it's got a knob on the end, and you turn it, and there's rewinds, and you just run whatever it is you're running in sync on this wheeled object. It also had a counter on it with nothing in it. Put it on the bench, hold it down, and spin it as hard as you could to see if you get the highest number on the counter. If this goes up on YouTube and there's some old school people around, they'll remember Synchronizer Racing.
Awesome.
People would bring in rubber gloves to get more traction on the wheel. And Synchronizer Racing. I love working digitally, but there's no Synchronizer Racing.
No. Well, thank you so much, Ron. This has been so educational, as always.
No problem. Enjoyed it.
You share a lot of secrets, so I appreciate that.
Not secrets anymore.
That's true. Shh.